I got up, Des, we had a good chat, and he's going to tell us about why certain approaches to metrics don't work, how you can closely follow your customers and find out what your customers do and need and want on your product. So here we go. Can you hear me in the back?
Can everyone hear me at the back? My voice is kind of damaged from a big karaoke night on Saturday, so I really can't scream too loud. Okay, so I'm going to talk about growing a user base in a startup, something we've done a few times. My background was primarily we built a product called Exceptional, which we sold, and we took all the money and put it into our new product, Intercom, which we're having good success with as well. And in Intercom, I work with, probably at this point in the last year, I've worked at over 100 startups, and a lot of the problems tend to be recurring, and I'd like to present some of the prescriptions or ideas that I give to these startups, which helps kind of unstick them and help them get their product moving. So the key ideas I'll talk about today are it's going to be positioning your product, where funnels can fall over or mislead. We'll look at distribution and conversion, the first 30 days of when a customer signs up for your product, which is basically make or break for almost everyone. And lastly, we'll just talk a little bit about retention and churn. So the first piece I'd like to talk about is positioning. And I've seen a sort of gradual shift. My original background is as a UX consultant, and originally when I came onto the job in like the early 2000s, everyone always handed you these pages of demographics about their product, and you were sort of told things like, your average user is an 18 to 27-year-old male who likes sports, and I'm like, oh, okay, in that case he's going to love an image in the top right. They give you this information that's pretty much useless or certainly not actionable, and that kind of moved forward to psychographics, which is like what is the state of mind of a user as they arrive. And when I last left UX, it was focusing on things like personas, which were kind of useful. So personas were this idea that you'd have a template for a user and get everyone on the same page. So this was a persona we produced for a hotel website, where we could sort of see this is the Smith family. They holiday in June and July, and they're value sensitive, but they shop online or whatever. And the way these were created was you go through, you interview a shitload of customers, plot out all the commonalities amongst them, identify there's a key customer set who has all of these attributes, and from that you build out personas. Whenever I worked with startups, we always ended up in a situation like this, though. And I was like, right, well, I was really stuck because it was certainly true that a family hotel website would have key types of users, but the more and more startups I worked with, whether it's, even if you take a big name one, I can't really disclose many of the ones I worked with, but if you take something like Pinterest, it's as popular, everyone says, oh, it must be females or must be this, but in truth, it's actually none of those things. There's just such a spread of users, and there's no easy way to break them down like this, because they're, everything from 16 to 60, they're everything from Dublin, Ireland, all the way through to San Diego. There's just not commonalities you can work with a lot of the times, which kind of led me thinking, well, maybe these things aren't exactly the idea. So I'm Des, I'm 31, I'm single, I work in software, I have some disposable income, I'm interested in design, business, and software, but none of that actually causes me to go and buy stuff. None of that is the reason why I go out, and I'd say it probably doesn't account for a single dollar I've spent in the past few weeks. And it was around about this time when I was kind of getting really struggling with this idea of well, if personas aren't cutting it, what's going to work? That I read a paper by Clay Christensen and a few others in Harvard, which is called, it was called Integrating Around the Job to be Done. But he tells a great story at the very start, which is he was hired to increase milkshake sales for a fast food chain in America. And they'd gone through the demographics, and they'd tried different types of advertisements, and then they went through psychographics, and then they looked at data, and they made all these changes to the milkshakes, and nothing. No significant increase. They could not change what milkshakes are being sold. So then they looked, and they took a totally different approach, which was everyone came out of the store with a milkshake, they'd say, why did you hire that milkshake? And people were like, what? Why did you hire this milkshake today? And no one really got what is the purpose of that question. It's a weird way to phrase it. And they said, well, think of the last time you were in this situation. What else did you hire? And the answer started to come in, and people were like, well, I hired this milkshake because I'm driving to work, and it's about a 40-minute journey, and I'm not hungry now, but I will be when I get there. And that's basically why I hired it. And the last thing I hired that did that as well was a Snickers bar, but then I felt like shit. And then I used to hire coffees, but then I have to stop to go to the bathroom. I hired a banana once, and I ended up squeezing it when I was trying to drive the car. And I hired a bagel, but then you've got to butter it, and I got crumbs all over myself. So a milkshake is actually a good fit. And they're like, okay, so the milkshake does a job here, which is keep the person full on the way to work, while also being a self-contained drink that's thick enough to be, like, make them not have to run to the bathroom, but it meant they could actually consume this while driving easily. And the concluding point of that paper is that if you focus on the job that people are trying to do, rather than who the person is, because these milkshake buyers were everything from 21-year-olds to 70-year-olds, but if you focus on the actual job they're trying to do, you realize how to improve it. The improvement in this case, they moved a milkshake machine around to the front and put in a loyalty card where you could self-serve, so which meant that all the people buying milkshakes did not have to queue with the rest of the guys who were getting McMuffins or whatever. So they were able to easily serve themselves and get out on the road with a milkshake. That was the first thing in 4 years that actually brought sales up significantly. And the key idea here is, well, why do we buy things? So a problem occurs in my life. For example, I'm hungry. The problem always has a situational context. In this case, for me, it was this morning, and I was in an airport, and it was basically 30 minutes before boarding. And that problem has a consideration set. So I'm not just going to buy anything, like as in, I'm not now considering I'm going to go for a steak in a restaurant, because there's a consideration set here. I don't want to cover myself in crumbs. I don't want to show up here with like soup all over my shirt. I don't want to miss my flight. If for some reason this boarding gate moves, I cannot be tied to this food location. So the problem plus the situation I'm in is actually what drives my considerations. And then I have success criteria for this. Am I full at the end of it? Am I clean? Have I managed to keep my shit together? Like, did I make my flight? And that's, you know, the point is, like, every one of these ideas has like every job will have a consideration set. And when you think about this, explains why, if I'm sitting there in an airport, Mars are equally on a level footing to compete with a Big Mac and also against a bottle of water and a vending machine sandwich. And if you ask the four of those guys, are you guys competing with each other, they'll say no. But for the job I'm hiring them to do, they're all direct competitors, and someone's going to win. In this case, unfortunately, it was a Mars bar. But so the idea is, you can apply this job speed on thinking to every type of product. For example, if I take a photo, every one of these products on the left does a different job for me. If it's Path, it's probably because I want to share a moment with a loved one. If it's Flickr, it's probably because I want to keep it online for posterity's sake and keep all the original formats there. If it's Facebook photos, it's probably that I want to embarrass my friends with a photo of them. If it's like Instagram, it's basically I want to get some sort of social kudos from my iPhone friends, if you like. And if it's Foursquare, it's kind of I'm trying to add some knowledge back. But they're all different jobs. So with the moment I snap that shot, that's actually when it all kicks. I always try to, so to turn this back to startups, I always sort of say, well, can you fill in the blanks in this sentence for me? People are going to hire your product to do what job, and what causes them to need this product, and how often does that happen? And I've worked with, say, people who do like one of these startups where it's like all your social files in one place. And I say, okay, Grant, but can you explain to me what's the problem that occurs in my life that triggers this? And they're like, no one's ever asked that particular question. And then you sort of start to try and manufacture it, because you're trying to then, and this is where marketers come in. You're sort of like, right, we've built something and we're not sure exactly how we can tell people they have a problem that this solves. So that's when you have to go and phrase it. But the closer you are tied to an exact job that needs doing, the less you'll actually need to stress about this. And like, as an example of this, if you moved to a new city and moved into a new apartment and you needed to furnish it, the one thing that comes to your mind beyond a shadow of a doubt, IKEA, where is it? You're going to go there because that's exactly, they've built an entire job or a store to do one job, help people furnish an apartment start to finish. And there's plenty of examples of success stories that do this. They just focus on doing one thing and doing it really, really well. But the jobs, sort of the key idea from this is to focus on causation. That is what triggers buying behavior, not what correlates with it. So I've worked with startups who say, well, it turns out all our premium users use Twitter. And I'm like, okay. They're like, so all we need to do is get everyone using Twitter, and then they're going to be premium users. And I was like, I'm not sure that that's correct. And conversely, like, some things will cause purchases in my life. If I'm worried about losing all my files forever, that worry is a problem, and I will hire a product to address that worry for me. And my consideration set is, who's going to give me most peace of mind, and then maybe later on, like, what's the easiest way to get there? But correlation itself isn't anywhere as useful. And related to this, like, these are the sort of misunderstandings people have. Like, whenever I see fires, I usually see firemen. Therefore, firemen cause fires. And the more firemen, the bigger the fire, you know. All of these things are true, but none of them are causation. And like, you know, you will see a lot of firemen around a big fire. That doesn't mean that you need a lot of guys to start a fire. Like, that's not the case either. It's just, I find that like an awful lot of the marketing efforts, particularly like applied by startups, kind of focus too much on what correlates with a good outcome rather than what actually causes it. But when you have actually got this position, when you have your product positioned well, you then have to look at, well, how can we influence this decision? And the decision you want to influence is usually you want someone to pick your product. You want Des to buy your product when he's hungry in an airport as opposed to somebody else. And every decision falls into one of 4 categories. The first thing it can be is fast or slow. The second thing it can be is based on emotion or based on fact. And these 4 together actually inform you. These are the 4 different ways people decide. The temptation for most of you now is to look at this chart and say, I'm definitely in the upper left quadrant or the bottom right. It's not actually you, it's every decision you make falls. So like sometimes you will be a competitive decider. That means you're going to go for the fastest, quickest thing you can get. And other times you'll be a humanistic decider, which is you're going to take your time and really work something out. And when you've actually decided, like, you know, which of these are the key, like, you know, for example, me in an airport, it's definitely going to be competitive because it has to be fast. And it's probably going to be based on like whatever the nearest available thing is. It's certainly not going to be, I'm not going to go off into the woods and reflect on what sort of vending machine sandwich defines me as a person. So when you know what sort of decision you're trying to influence, that's actually what tells you, well, this is the sort of elements we need on our landing page. And for example, so just if you're a rational, slow decider, detailed case studies, extensive documentation, uptime, security, support information, all of that sort of stuff is good if I'm going to take my time and go through this. However, if I'm a competitive, as in I've got like 5 minutes to make a call, I'm probably going to be swayed by fact sheets, checklists, discounts, any of those sort of things. Like, give me the quick line on this. And you can sort of see like a spontaneous emotional decider is going to be swayed by an emotive one-liner or a social proof that is like someone else's logo, and they're like, oh, if they use them, we will. But you can even see this sort of decision type evolve like across the web. So if you look at, say, Dell, this is Dell. This is like me looking for a laptop on Dell. And what they've gone here is they're giving me like offers and facts and bullet points. And so they're obviously going for the competitive decider. Apple, absolutely zilch information, except for it comes with the software you'll love to use. And they're obviously going for, maybe it's impulsive, but they're going for the emotional sort of pitch instead. If you flick over to the MacBook Pro, again, it goes back to 2.86 gigahertz of pure raw power and all that sort of stuff. But that was just another point. Like, so it's when you position your product and then decide what type of decision you're trying to influence, one sort of addendum to that is that it can often make sense if your product is complicated to try and break down the cell into 2 different parts. So there's a great blog post which is called Come for the X and Stay for the Y. And it's based off this model of like, you know, come along for the food and you'll stay for the drinks, or you'll stay for the cabaret or whatever. But it says that an awful lot of products have an initial value and a lasting value. So the initial value is what actually gets you in the door and gets you like, shit, this is kind of useful. And the lasting value is why you're still there 12 months later. And this is actually really important because there's so many products that like have the initial value, such as like, you know, we convert all your files online for free. And you're like, oh, cool, so you can convert this Excel file to something else or whatever. And you do it once and then you leave because there's absolutely no lasting value. Conversely, if you have a lasting value but no initial value, this is where you can end up, like a lot of analytics tools end up here where they sort of, you sign up and it's just like, now configure your dashboard, now configure your funnels, now configure your filters. And you're just like, Jesus Christ, who's working for who here? So if you don't actually have an initial hit of value, it doesn't matter how good your lasting value is. So it's worth considering. So Dropbox was the famous one. Dropbox pitched as this could be a folder you could all work on together. And it just so happened, by the way, that this was the back door of this was, oh, and we're also going to, you know, you can also back up your entire life. And you're like, oh, that's handy. Or Facebook's initial kick was you could find your school friends who you've lost, and you probably lost for a good reason, but nonetheless, here they are. And we consider this as well, because the Intercom is a kind of a complex product in some ways. And so we wanted to give an initial kick of value that would get people interested, and then hopefully they'll stick around for the more advanced features we have. So that was all I want to say about positioning. The next thing, it's probably overstating it to say that I like to rag on analytics, but I like to rag on funnels. Because one thing, if nothing else, it's the worst metaphor for what happens at a sign-up page, because everything that goes into a funnel comes out the other end, which is 100% conversion rate. So a funnel is just literally not what we're dealing with here. A leaky bucket or something might be more correct, but One problem with funnels is that people accept or expect that their customers, when they land on their page, is like, right, we've got them. But that's not the case. Like, here's me shopping for a flight, and here's me in 5 funnels. There's only going to be one purchase out of this. But what people miss is that the decision when I make when I'm shopping isn't actually informed necessarily by what's in your funnel. It could be in any of the other 5, or it could be in none of the funnels. I could be shopping around online. I could be asking questions. I could be saying, has anyone ever used Snagit in this case? Is it worth getting? And people are like, oh, I get feedback that way. And at the whole time, you're sitting there tweaking your A's and B's, your A/B tests, and like changing various shades of red. And it's got nothing to do with that. I'm making my decision based on external factors. So another danger with funnels is that I feel that people get obsessed with like, okay, we've moved the barrier. We had a problem where people weren't clicking sign up. Now we've just put a sign up button and nothing else there. So now everyone's on step 2. Now they're not entering their email address. Well, let's not ask for the email address. Now they're on step 3. And you kind of, yes, a certain amount of complexity you can remove, and the rest you're just pushing around from place to place. And like, you have to accept that. If you don't accept that, you end up doing like all sorts of slimy tactics just to try and push people down the line. So you could just say it's free sign up, it's a $5 a month. Or you can just keep stepping it up a notch with all the slime and sleaze just to get people to click this link. And if the only purpose of a screen is to have someone click a button, why don't you just take them to where that button was going to take them? Well, because you start to realize then, well, Jesus, maybe we're actually trying to do something else with our product too. This is like when Forrester basically decided to throw in the towel on funnels. This is their last definition of a funnel, which I think is an absolute mess, but like it's kind of funny. Because they're trying to show you, the key point they're trying to say is that gone are the days when people come in one side and come out the other side, and you control the entire experience for them. They are useful for optimizing. That's the one point, like that. This is where they actually make sense. When you're actually just trying to tweak something. I'm going to drink someone else's water here because my voice is in bits, but I hope they don't mind. That's not water. Just a quick piece related to funnels is on a distribution and conversion. People tend to talk about them as 2 different things. So distribution, they then talk about, can we get our product out to all these places? And then as an entirely separate exercise, they look at their conversion rate, not realizing that like these 2 things are literally joined at the hip. But conversion rate in and of itself should only ever be like an indication of something. It's a ratio above all else. Jared Spool has a great point when he sort of says, whenever people hire him to improve their conversion rate, he says, I'm going to give you 2 doors. Behind one of them gets no extra sales, but your conversion rate goes up. Behind the other one gets a terrible conversion rate, but your sales go up. Which one do you want? And obviously people then kind of go, oh shit, well maybe. And then he's like, right, so what are we stressing about conversion rate for? Is it not that we want more money? And like just as an exercise in that, if you actually want a higher conversion rate, especially if you're in e-commerce, just kill all your advertising. Kill absolutely everything, and then the only people who will visit will people who already know and have already visited, and if they're coming back, it's only to purchase. Conversion rate goes up, but like that's not what you wanted, right? So this is like, the guts of this problem is this. We have all these different types of traffic sources, and then we just call 2% conversion, which isn't that informative. This is the same way they look at 2% conversion. Well, here's where we get our traffic from. Here's where we get our conversion. Here's our conversion rate per source. And then here's our customers acquired. So which of these 3 are you actually interested in? Well, if it turns out that your blog gets you all your customers, then you don't really care about, like, it's far more informative to know this chart on the right than it is the other 2. And you can take this one step further and say, what about paying customers acquired? Or what about premium customers acquired? Because that's the information you're actually interested in. So when you actually go ahead and acquire a customer and you haven't obsessed over your funnels and you get them in the door, one thing I'd encourage you all to do is just, when you get a customer, there's 4 pieces of data you need to keep tracking on them so you can actually understand what's going on. If you have profile data, it really helps. That is, who is this person? Do you know, are they the VP of IBM or are they a student in Bristol? Activity data, are they using your product whatsoever? Business data, if they are using it, are they a premium account or pro account or free account? And support data. Is anyone talking to them? Are they having any issues? Any of these sort of questions. That's the 4 bits of information that makes up a customer. If you hide any one of these, you're going to have an incomplete picture. You could spend all your time marketing to somebody who's a student, or you could spend all your time pitching to somebody who has 11 open support tickets and hates you. But like, you need these 4 pieces together. When you have them together, you can actually understand engagement. Because engagement, basically, people don't focus on it enough. People focus heavily on website visitors and trial signups. not realizing that like engagement itself is a force multiplier in the middle here as well. If you can increase engagement, you'll increase your throughput, which should increase your upgrades. And obviously, all of these are different activities to do it. But engagement tends to be overlooked. We spend so long, like what Gary Vaynerchuk would call like the 18-year-old approach to marketing. We're just trying to get them to say yes. But like, you know, the real goal here is actually to get them to say yes for the next 24 months, because you're probably looking for recurring revenue here. If you get it wrong, obviously you see this, and every single time I run this graph for any startup I work with, when they're having this problem, it's always the same. We have a shitload of people who visited us once, and then it just collapses off, and there's a long tail, and your actual real customers are here. So one thing I'd love to say to any of the startups in the room is, if you are experiencing this problem, and I'm guessing you are at different degrees, because everyone does to some extent, consider a message schedule that will actually help. So message schedule is basically, do you have like a strategy in place that has you regularly talking to people as they're using your product? And if you do, you'll see immediate rewards. It's probably the biggest piece of low-hanging fruit sitting there for startups, in my opinion. And there's obvious things to do. You welcome them when they sign up. You can send them, like after 3 days, if they haven't invited their teammates, send them a mail saying, why don't you invite your teammates, etc. There's other useful things you can do as well, like say, doing a checkup after a fixed period of time, whether it's 15 days or 30 days, but actually send them a personal note, or at least automatically send them a personal note to say, like, how's things going? You've been with us 30 days. Is the product working well? The reason you want to do this is because that lets you look at all your feedback clumped together. So if you can look at all your 30-day feedback together, you'll realize what the problem is for 30-day customers, and similarly for 90 days. Because initial feedback, i.e. day one feedback, is always going to be, I can't find out how to do this, I can't find out how to do that, do you have this, do you have that? But it's actually, to be able to cohort that feedback is actually very, very useful. And that kind of brings us to our last point, which is just retention and churn. So everyone thinks of churn as being this limiting factor on how we grow. But that's churn from the point of view of when somebody cancels using your product. They actually stop, so they cancel. Just, yeah, what you're seeing here, by the way, there's 3 companies, each growing at the same rate. However, they have different degrees of churn. So the only point I'm making here is that churn matters, which I'm guessing you already do. The problem is people think of churn as account cancellations, but account cancellations are like the trailing indicator. That's the last thing to happen. You know, what actually happens is this, which is that the frequency at which they use your product decreases rapidly over time. And if you don't catch them when they're decreasing, they're gone. There is no point when they've actually, you know, when they're here of saying, hey, we noticed we haven't seen you in a while, come back. And you're like, no. You know, like that's not going to work. You have to catch them when they're actually disengaging. Because like, I think the myth is that people just wake up and go, right, today I'm going to cancel. But they don't actually cancel today. What happens is they just stop using you for a long, long time. And then one day you send them a receipt or their credit card expires, and then they go, shit, am I still paying for that? Cancel. And that's like, you know, at that point you're beyond recovery. So one question, if you can't answer this question easily, you're always going to struggle, which is how many of our premium or paying customers haven't been online in the past 30 days? And if you don't have an easy way to get that on a regular basis, you will struggle, because that is basically your activity churn, and it's the people you wanted to keep. So the obvious way people do this is like with a cohort analysis, which is when you can sort of see where they're going. But the last piece that we'll leave you with is that, like, if the cohort analysis is surprising you, then you're doing something else wrong, because it shouldn't be a shock to you that no one sticks around for 3 months. You should have more contact with your customers, or somebody in your team should be regularly talking to your customers to be able to tell you this. If the data is the first person to tell you it, then you're so out of touch with your customer base, you're in trouble. So to wrap it up, position your product against a job to be done. Design for different types of decisions. Consider a 2-part sell. Obsess over experiences, not funnels. Break down your conversion rates. Have a great communication schedule. Oh, watch out for activity churn, and above all, have fun. If you'd like to try Intercom, there's a code here. And other than that, I'd just like to say thanks for the opportunity.
A few minutes for questions.
Sure. Just to preempt one question, if anyone's looking for the slides, they'll be on blog.intercom.io, just because I could see a lot of people scribbling, and I should have said that at the start. Any questions?
For dealing with your point of question, collecting and monitoring this data is really well taken. A lot of people who are starting up companies, though, don't, especially from certain backgrounds, don't have a lot of analytic, statistical background. What is the sort of threshold you need to get to really take advantage of this
Of analytics, you say?
Yeah, analytics or analysis experience.
So I think that the threshold is pretty low. Like there's a certain basic level of KPIs for any web app that honestly, thankfully analytics is maturing to the point of view that, 1 second, sorry. Never do karaoke. Analytics used to be, we're going to give you all the data on a screen and we're going to draw some pictures, and what you're going to get is pretty pictures of shit that's easy to measure, but none of it's useful. It's now getting to the point, thankfully, where people are actually giving you meaningful insight on screens. So for me, like, you know, if you have a tool, and like there's plenty of them, Mixpanels is a great example, that will let you like dig deep and ask something like, what is our conversion ratio per traffic source? That's honestly, like, that for me is almost all I needed to know to understand what marketing is and isn't working. And so like it's, you know, and like that's like a 5-click sort of thing, as long as you have a developer who can set it up. So I take the point that like statistical sort of backgrounds are like few and far between amongst the startup world, but they don't really, like, it's the insights I've gotten from my background in stats haven't really like massively led me any further down a path than anywhere else. The only, like, I guess the only key insight that I have ever brought to the party, if you like, would just be like that focusing on averages and aggregates across your entire site is just a really messy way to look at things. I always joke that like the average person on Earth, for example, has 1.91 legs. That's just true. But like it's, you know, if you were to take that as a template for what your average human is, it's a bad idea, right? So again, all you need is the ability to go one step below averages and aggregates, and you'll probably find most of the answers you're actually looking for. Anyone else?
In terms of engaging the user, who is engaging themselves? Is there any kind of rule of thumb? Because I imagine it just goes down a little and you're always coming back and saying, why don't you do something on my site? It's a bit annoying.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of
best practices or whatever. So this is actually one thing that Intercom actually does do, or at least it lets you trigger a message based on inactivity. But the best message we saw, it actually came from one of our customers back to us. What they do is, like, they tried every variation of the, oh, we're so sad to see you go mail, and it never worked. What they then shifted to was, after 30 days of inactivity, they send you the change log of all the recent product updates in the past 30 days with screenshots of them. And then they update that message itself every 30 days, so it's always up to date. The key insight here being that you're moving from telling someone, please log in, to motivating them to log in. So the two outcomes they got was an increase in people coming back to the app. But everyone else who didn't come back to the app, what they realized was, oh shit, your product is actually moving forward. So then I'll say, well look, the reason I signed up was because I thought I'd be able to search by blah, and are you going to add that product or add that feature? And by even just starting that dialogue, two things happen. Either you answer yes, it's coming next month, and they're like, oh cool, I'll stick around. Or at the very least, you now know why you're losing these guys. So that's the best advice I could give you with this engagement. Yes?
For dealing with qualitative feedback from customers, do you recommend, like, do you prefer like NPS or CSAT, or like, how do you collect that and how do you fit it into the analysis framework?
So there's a couple of questions there. Like, first thing is, if you, me?
Oh, sorry, the Net Promoter Score set of people, what ratio of people would recommend your product to a friend, and then the CSAT, customer satisfaction, is the sort of 1 to 5. How do you feel today?
So I tend, like, I mean, we don't do too many like surveys, like, so like that's basically, like, you know, that is effectively quantitative data coming back to you. What I tend to do is try and like break down our user base into, like, you know, we have maybe like 16 different types of users we have. We have like startup first week, big company first week, startup after a month, first week of paying and all that. And each of those triggers its own type of message, which will then pull feedback back. We're still, I mean, it's tough, but we're still at the point where we value the qualitative feedback so much that we're actually willing to throw humans at it, before we actually break it down into just, you know, 1 to 7s or Likert scales or any of that sort of stuff. So usually what happens is, like, every Monday or Tuesday or so, I guess it'll be Tuesday because I'm here today, but we'll have, like, basically, right, here's what's happening. Our recent changes to onboarding have worked because here's the new set of feedback that's coming back. Here are the most common problems in feedback. Here's the most common things that made people convert. So, like, we do a lot of communication both inside our product and externally through emails and stuff like that. But it's all around kind of learning things. Like, it's really useful for us to know, and again, this is a simple question I throw at startups. What convinced your customers to sign up? And most people say, oh, well, I figured their trial expired. And I'm like, yeah, but where is the key value? Because the sooner you can move the key value forward, the sooner you get the conversion, like, you know. So the high level response is, what we tend to do is break down our customer base into very, very small segments and have automatic messages which will talk to them at those points and gather feedback. That feedback kind of gets lumped up into sort of reports where if there's any new problems we know about them, any recurring problems we know about them, but we haven't moved towards quantitative data yet.
So when the startup first gets started and they don't have that much quantitative data, suggesting like custom interviews.
So the question is like, if we don't have the quantitative data, would I suggest customer interviews or qualitative data? My answer is absolutely yes. I mean, I think like I've never seen a startup struggle from having too much customer feedback or validation early on. So yeah, I would totally like it's. Whenever I see somebody who's built something that doesn't really do a job, like it does not build against a job, I sort of say, well, tell me like the first 5 people you ran this by, and they're like, oh well, him. And I'm like, yeah, your co-founder doesn't count, you know. So like, yeah, absolutely, I would say like, you know, yeah, totally. But like, I would say do it to the point where you're uncomfortable with how much you're doing it, and then you will see yourself depreciating returns, like. As in, like, you're like, right, I've heard everything I need to hear now, and all I'm getting out of new interviews is the same shit again. Then you can knock it on the head and go and build it into the product. So.
Last question, Art?
So we try and look at data over rates to determine whether we're performing well or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how do we know, like for example, a conversion rate of 0.5% is good or bad? Like maybe that's amazing. Because what we're doing, you know, most of us in the group are doing something quite new. We don't really have much to compare it to.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Like, and if you're trying to benchmark your conversion rate, like, I mean, the first thing I'd say is like, it's not 0.5%, like it's 0.5% per channel. So as in like, anyone who's gone to intercom.io in this room today, I would expect a higher than 0.7% conversion rate from people who do it. The reason for that is that, you know, if you're talking to people who could potentially use your product about something that they should really, really like, then why would you accept that less than 1 in 100 would actually go ahead and try it, right? So I think the reason we all accept these like 0.5 or 0.9 or 0.4% conversion rates is because we're aggregating them across noisy traffic sources. So like, you know, we got TechCrunched once and our conversion rate went through the floor, you know, because we just got a load of shit traffic basically. Like, but like, so you can sit there and pull your hair out, but like, if your question is how can you benchmark it against like either competitors or anything like that, it's like it's hard. Like what you want to do is first of all like only talk about it in terms of per channel, and then look at improving it per channel. But like I don't know, like it's hard if you're doing something new. What can you compare it to? I don't know. Like, I mean, do you have competitors? Probably not, or at least if you do, they haven't identified themselves yet, or you don't understand how customers see you as competitors with other people. But the only reason we use our conversion percentages is as a way to monitor our own progress. So, you know, if we've got better adverts, for example, we changed one of our adverts to say, do you run a web app? And you click yes. And that was a change which actually increased our conversion rate from that channel. And it was therefore a better ad, even though the CTR was lower. So it's, you know, you have to look at it as channels and then just look at increasing the percentages that way. But I can't speak to how you'd assess it across a competition base or anything like that. It's not that easy, I don't think.
All right.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.